episode 2. Well, actually, this is the first episode in a sister series to Dusty and Doc. This is Doc and Wolf with Your History. That's Y-O-U-R for people who understand the English language and understand the difference between your, and your. Greetings, Wolf. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm alive. I'm alive. I was listening to my cut last night of the first show I did into the wee hours of the morning, and I didn't wake up to the much later hours of the morning. That being said, that opening intro was brought to you by the power metal group Sabaton. The song is called Killing Ground. It relates to their battles with the Russian army on their home turf, where they literally took on an army twice their size, and thanks to a surprise snowstorm, as well as the military prowess and genius of their king, Carolus Rex, they beat the Russians, hands down. And that's when the people in the Swedish army started actually thinking that Carolus Rex was under divine protection and the messenger of God. And to be quite honest, if I was in the army at that time, I'd probably think the same thing. Thoughts?
Agreed.
Well, you're kind of a newcomer to Sabaton.
Yes.
Carolus Rex being one of my new favorite military leaders, as well as Swedish kings. And like my buddy Tim Day said, I've got actually a couple of favorite Swedish kings, which I would not have known about if it wasn't for Sabaton. But in your list of top 10 military leaders throughout history, name us a few of them.
Oh, of course, at the top of the list, this might sound cliche, but of course I'd have to put Alexander the Great. He pretty much conquered the world and changed a lot of stuff.
No, he conquered the world. As far as the world was concerned, Alexander the Great is the closest thing to a world-dominating leader we've ever had. Now, people might want to retcon history, and I don't disagree, but by total landmass, the Khans did conquer more. But as far as number of cultures, I think Alexander still beat them out.
Oh, yes, the Khans, you also have to look at the regions they were conquering and the population in them.
Although the Khans, my favorite story about the Khans is under Genghis. Everybody throughout history makes the classic blunder of invading Asia, or invading Russia in a land war in the winter. I think that was even a point that the Sicilian made in The Princess Bride. But the Khans were a roving band of horsemen. They actually had a couple of plays in their book that went totally against stuff that Sun Tzu wrote about. And they won. And they embraced the cold. And the one thing that they did to really screw with the Russians is whenever the Russian rivers froze over, the Khans were like, oh, sweet, freeways. And would just ride up the frozen rivers and then harass the towns. And I think the Russians in various townships were still paying ransoms and safety, gold to the Khans for, God, I think past Kublai. I'm not quite sure about that one. If you guys know the answers out there, feel free to leave a comment and correct me. Moving on. Sorry about that, Wolf.
No problem.
So you have Alexander the Great.
Alright, one of the few things that made Alexander the Great stick out to me, besides just the amount of achievements he did and his ideals that he tried to inspire across the world, he wasn't one of those military leaders who would just sit back on his horse and just boss people around. He was out there. He was killing, and he always put himself in danger. One of the best stories of him, this is going to sound pretty dumb because I forgot the name of the city, but it was a Greek city off the coast of Greece, started with a T. But no, they saw it was impregnable, high walls, no way to really get to it. Alexander decided to build a very, very long bridge and made a giant siege tower to roll across. Well, the enemy destroyed, bombed, and destroyed the bridge, essentially. Alexander said, okay, do it again, just get better.
Ha!
So they finally make it across. They finally make it to the walls. And the battle isn't going too well. Alexander, seeing his men, kind of starting to say, maybe this isn't a good idea. Well, at that point, Alexander leaps over the wall into the thick of battle by himself.
Oh, geez.
His men thinking, oh my god, he just got killed.
We just lost the leader.
They rushed over to try and claim his corpse. Surprisingly, they found that Alexander was in the thick of it, fighting off hundreds of enemies by himself, and which inspired them to push forward, and they end up taking the city.
Wow. No, there's always a noticeable difference. I mean, Napoleon was a brilliant tactician. That goes without saying. Unless memory escapes me at the moment, I don't really recall many situations where Napoleon jumped off and joined the front lines.
No. I'm not going to discredit any military leaders that did stay back. Not everyone is a frontline warrior.
Or you have people like Patton who they did their time as a grunt and just rose to the ranks. I mean, he was a tactician too, but I mean, Patton knew what it was like to, be in the line of fire from back when he first joined the military.
Oh yeah, you always have to take into account Alexander. He was in his youth. He was in his early to mid 20s.
Well, he was the son. He was the son of King Philip of Macedonia, and that would have entitled him to live a pretty cushy life, and be one of those guys who sort of fought from the sidelines. Nobody would have faulted him for that, but he wanted to get his hands dirty too. Another thing too I know about Alexander was whenever his army took over a foreign city, he actually found cultural significance in things that the population did. Like there's a certain city in Asia, or God, this completely escapes me, but this is just completely anecdotal. It really happened, but I forget the names and dates. But where like some of the people would wear shrouds. I don't think it was a Muslim thing, but it was just sort of a like a fashion or like a living in the desert thing. And the next day after taking the city, Alexander came out to address his army dressed just like a local person from that village, as if nothing had happened. He was really big into mixing of cultures and kind of picking and choosing, and that's what made him very diplomatic and also kind of likable even to the people that he conquered. Because, name a military leader who, let's say they went, let's say they went out and conquered Bermuda, all right, and then the next day they came out into battle wearing Bermuda shorts. I mean, that's almost unheard of, minus the triangle.
That would be amusing.
It would be amusing.
But yes, Alexander, he did try and embrace all cultures. He wasn't trying to make the entire world into Greece. He was trying to expand the philosophies of Greece by keeping the native cultures alive.
I mean, pretty much, unless you put up a unusual amount of resistance, he was content just to beat you, absorb you, and move on. He wasn't really big in the whole scorched earth thing, and I think this is what caused a lot of infighting between him and Ptolemy. And the situation behind his death is still pretty mysterious. People want to say rabies, people want to say pneumonia, people want to say a night of drinking and passing out in the cold, all the way up to being poisoned. So, good one. Moving along here, I'm going to do tit for tat. I'm a big fan of Alexander the Great, but when it comes to guts, and even especially during the advent of the firearm, where people were still kind of content to fight from a distance, I'd have to say, although he was kind of commander-in-chief, I don't really think... Oh, anyways, Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, come on. Teddy Roosevelt was just the epitome of badassness. He was born a sickly kid on the East Coast. He lost his wife and mom to tuberculosis or some horrible disease, or just coincidentally. He had asthma. He wasn't, he pretty much went out to what you told me. He went out west to die. He had his little frilly shirt on. He got made fun of by the cowboys, and instead of fulfilling his prophecy, he embraced the ruggedness of that culture. He literally punched asthma in the face, and the Rough Riders, was it San Juan Hill? San Juan Hill. And the funny thing about that is, yes, they were Rough Riders, but they stormed that position on foot. A lot of people affiliated, him and his band of men, sort of like riding up the hill. No, they walked. They covered. They took a heavily fortified high ground enemy position and whooped their ass. And it didn't stop there. When he was president, delivering a speech, some gunmen in the crowd walked up to him point blank range, shot him right in the chest. And Teddy Roosevelt admonished the man for making him bleed all over his speech, dried the speech off, and refused all medical attention until the speech was completed. And back then, speeches were everything. It was like maybe, I think, 2 hours, an hour, something like that. You know, most people get a friggin', see, I've never actually had the misfortune of being shot. I can only imagine it sucks. And I'm not trying to discount people who've been winged in battle. I'm not trying to discount the importance of, or how badly it feels if you get, like, quote unquote, a flesh wound. But no, he took that bullet right in the chest. They had to dig it out of him. And, yeah, he kept up with the speech. He went blind in his left eye, I think, during a sparring match in the backyard of the White House. And he was really upset about that because now he had to aim his rifle with his other eye. And also another Teddy Roosevelt anecdote that I learned from crack.com is, I guess, during one of his on the train, not inauguration, what are they called when they kind of like kiss babies and shake hands? Not inauguration. Anyways, it'll come to me. But he was on the back of the train waving at the crowd, and through whatever circumstances, I'm not quite sure what this is all about, but I guess apparently back then it was a common thing for children to throw badgers at you, apparently. Because some little girl in the crowd with a baby badger hucked it at Roosevelt. He caught it, named it, and the badger never left his side. He was like a dog in the White House. Just Teddy Roosevelt badger tamer. But no, he was actually, the funny thing, a little aside here, there was the myth perpetuated about piranhas. Now, don't get me wrong, you couldn't pay me enough to swim with piranhas, but it turns out they're kind of scavengy. That most of them eat plants. They like to take out the sick and the nearly dead animals. They're not really big onto the whole feasting on you while you're alive and healthy thing. But in order to impress Teddy Roosevelt, the natives who heard he was coming to visit, I think during a trip when he was going to oversee some Panama Canal construction, cordoned off a certain section of the Amazon River where there was a school of piranhas, and left them there, starving for like a week. When Teddy Roosevelt came to visit, they're like, "Oh, look at these things. These fish will kill you." And they just went and threw a live cow into the that little cordoned area. And, obviously there's the foamy blood in the water, and then, like, the bones came to the top. And that's where we got the myth that the piranhas are vicious. Don't get me wrong. Would not swim with them, but it's been sort of debunked by several naturalists that piranhas, unless they're starving, really don't take on live, healthy creatures with such ferocity. And, of course, there's a myth that the situation with the teddy bear. People trying to impress Teddy Roosevelt chained up the last brown bear in the region. Mm-hmm. And Teddy Roosevelt was like, "This isn't a fair fight. You guys are stupid." And he demanded the bear be let go. And it was actually his political enemies who were trying to do a satire of him, but they wound up making one of the most beloved children toys known to man. Mm-hmm. But we just don't have very many leaders like him anymore. I have a firm belief that if the attacks on 9/11 happened and Teddy Roosevelt was somehow still in office, he would have flown his own private helicopter to the middle of the Afghani desert and called out bin Laden for a one-on-one knife fight, probably insulting his mother in the process.
That sounds about right.
Sounds about right. So let's go, what other guys you like? Military.
Oh. I don't know, how about you pick one? Let me think.
I'm a big fan of Rommel. See, Rommel is historically depicted as fighting with Hitler, and yes, that's true. But Rommel wasn't a Nazi, and the fact that Rommel was so far away from the from Berlin, see, Rommel would have been one of the first people that Hitler's goon squads would have taken out due to not being sympathetic towards their leader's beliefs. But Rommel was in the desert theater, and most of the people from the Allies who went up against him, after being beaten back and broken, had nothing but a healthy respect for the man. He knew how to use the terrain. I think one of his favorite moves was there was a narrow choke point, almost like Thermopylae, and after each battle, he would bulldoze the corpses of the troops into a wall, just like almost kind of what Leonidas did. And so anyone attacking Rommel's strong point would have to literally climb over the bodies of their comrades, which is sort of demoralizing, from what I understand.
Oh, just a little.
But he was there's actually a movie made about him, I think, in the 50s or the 40s, very specific that he was not a Nazi. He was pretty much in it for the fighting. Now, did he serve an evil regime? Yes. But it's, military talent, it just happens regardless of what side you're on. But like I said, had he been stationed, or had he been closer to the actual theater in Berlin, he probably would have been taken out by the SS. Because, Hitler, pretty much, if you didn't toe that party line, especially to the end of it, you're dead. Let's see here. And we got, Carolus Rex, military leader and king of the Swedish, well, now defunct Swedish Empire, that I happen to like a lot, thanks to Sabaton kind of filling me in on some of the blanks there in Swedish history. I guess Sweden back in the day didn't really have a whole lot in the way of import and exports. They didn't have a lot of tin, they didn't have a lot of metal, they didn't have a lot of resources, so they exported badasses. We're talking people that would take pikes to a gunfight and win. And Carolus Rex was the heir to the Swedish Empire after Gustavus Adolphus. I think the only Swedish king, or one of the only kings in the area, given the title of Magnus post-mortem, meaning the Great One. I guess that's sort of they have like a conference of kings, sort of like they do with the Pope or saints for the Catholic Church, and they decide on titles to give to kings post-mortem, and what's his face? Gustavus Adolphus got Magnus. And it was under Gustavus Adolphus and Carolus Rex that we got the Caroleans. Some of the craziest battle tactics known to man. Like I said, they beat the Russians on their home turf. I think a 2-to-1 ratio. 7 times the Russians charged, 7 times the Russians retreated. Carolus, not being one to let go of a grudge, actually moved troops forward into Russia. And being from Sweden, they didn't care too much about the Russian winter. The problem was, I believe, one of the backers for a supply train flaked out on Carolus Rex near the end of it, and by the time they got to the battleground in Poltava, the Swedes were half-starved. Many of them were already dead from disease and starvation, and they were sort of easily beaten, and Carolus had to retreat back, regain strength, and before another decisive battle against Russia, he was actually killed by one of his own men, or one of the nobles, due to some of the policies he was enacting as a king that didn't really treat the nobility very well, because he was more about merit than he was about birthright. This coffee need to refill soon. Alright. Now that being said, we've got some more leaders. Did you ever come up with another one there, Wolf?
Oh, just mulling over a bunch in my head. I could talk about Leonidas, but that's kind of played out by now.
Well, there's no... See, I have a love-hate relationship with the movie 300. Some of the stuff they got completely right, like the Spartans inspecting the newborn children upon birth, and literally chucking them off a cliff or to the wolves if the baby came up puny or spindly. The Agogi, where they said, okay, you're 9. See in 2 weeks if you survive, and throw them out in the wilderness.
The Agogi, if you want to get into that, if you watch just the movie 300, you got like a glimpse of what the Agogi is.
But they did a montage. You can't do justice to... Yeah. I mean, pretty much their children became wild animals who had to kill for their food, fight off other children, kill other children. I mean, this is like the Hunger Games, but for real.
Yeah. Pretty much imagine at the age of 8 being drug off away from your parents. Well, actually, your mom, because your father was probably busy in the military.
Yes.
Which was standard.
Per the norm at the time.
Yes. And so you pretty much spent all the way up to 16 or 18, something like that, of just pure military training, which was brutal. One, to actually graduate, you had to sneak out of your barracks at night and strangle a local slave to death with your hands without being caught.
Holy crap.
And they would purposely starve the recruits or the trainees to make them have to go out and salvage, steal, and do what they needed to find food. Because back then, you didn't have big, long military trains of supplies and stuff. Pretty much, if you went to a region that was not your own, you had to pillage to
because Sparta was an island, and Greece...
No.
No. I'm thinking of something else.
You're thinking of Crete, probably.
I'm thinking of Crete. But okay. My geography and competence aside, Greece itself isn't very rich in anything besides really olives. You have to scrape. There's not going to be supply trains. I mean, the one thing the movie got right too is that little goat path that the hunchback wound up selling out to the Persians. I mean, Persian scouts were in the area for weeks and couldn't find it. The train of Greece, it's almost like the train of kind of like the mountainous regions of Ridgecrest. It's not a nice place to be. Yeah. And so for a king, and that's the thing too I like about it. If you had royal blood, that's wonderful, but you still had to go through the same shit everybody in the citizenry did. And if the king's kid died, the king's kid died.
And here's another little interesting tidbit. In Sparta, if I remember correctly, there's actually two kings. There's the military one, Leonidas, and then there was the more homestead diplomatic one. Because, yeah, Leonidas, he's pretty badass, but yeah, you might not want to have him at the debating table. He might just end up killing everyone.
Very true.
Which would be Spartan way, but another interesting tidbit about...
Well, also, I don't mean to cut you off here.
Sure.
But for the time, too, they were very diplomatic, very progressive when it came to their women. Spartan women could divorce, I believe. Spartan women were entitled to their dead husbands' belongings. Queens had equal standing as kings. They weren't just there for arm candy and to be pretty.
Well, in Spartan society, there was only two classes of people that were allowed a actual burial. One, a Spartan soldier who died in battle, and a Spartan woman who died in childbirth, because they both considered that a service to the state. Because childbirth was pretty much just to supply new soldiers.
Well, we take it for granted in this day and age, but the concept of surviving childbirth is relatively new. First off, I mean, back in the day, if you needed a cesarean, you're probably going to die. That's not to say that people didn't survive. I forget what the guy's name was, but the guy that finally beat Macbeth, he was a cesarean boy. But yeah, if the baby was tilted, and also too, with Spartan mothers, they had to carry him full term because if they came out preemie, they were thrown to the friggin' jackals.
Yeah.
So, also, this is back in the day before antibiotics, before the modern medicine. You could literally die of a paper cut or a bite wound, or even even a self-inflicted sword wound if you were trained too hard. It wasn't very pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I also believe if you lost your shield in battle, you either died trying to get it back, or you went and died. Because if you came back without your shield, you were a permanent disgrace, and I think forbidden from the proper burial of a Spartan. Well, you're pretty much called a coward.
Yeah.
Because those shields, it was hammered brass over thick wood.
Bronze,
I mean,
yes.
Bronze. There's a reason why those arrows didn't penetrate. And also, too, the funny thing about Spartans is the one thing the movie kind of touched on, but didn't really get into it too much, is the fact that they were not only trained in battle, but they were trained in classic poetry. They were very into puns. They were very clever. The whole thing about our arrows will block out the sun. Well, we shall fight in the shade. Actual quote. Spartans, drop your weapons. Persians, come and get them. Actual quote.
Here's another funny tidbit, especially about the Battle of Thermopylae, is, like you said, they were very heavily into poetry, but they were also very into hygiene. Before the battle, the Persians documented saying that the Spartans were washing their hair, cleaning, braiding, combing. They want to look pretty if they were about to die. And before battle, unlike most standing armies who would do like war cries, try and pump up their blood, Spartans had flutes playing, very calm, serene music, because they figured that yes, anger can be good, but they would rather have disciplined soldiers that still could keep their mind.
Yeah, because getting blood drunk is not something that they. Because if you broke rank, you broke the phalanx, and you could bring the whole front line down. So they were extremely disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
But didn't mean to beat Spartan to death because that's kind of been done a lot. But we can move on. Oh, okay, the one thing I was going to say is the movie should have been called 300 and the other couple thousand.
Yeah, because
it wasn't just the 300. The other armies didn't leave in the manner depicted in the movie. The Spartans were in the thick of it, and they were being badasses. But I believe it was the Acacians.
There was a few. There were Thracians. There was a couple other groups. It rounded off to about 2,000 extra troops besides the 300.
Yeah.
And the only reason why the Persians were able to get through that goat pass, because I forget their name, the Thracians, I believe, were the ones supposed to be guarding it. I think there was about 800 men there. Still formidable Greeks. They could have held for a while, but they saw that the Persians were going to be marching to their home city that wasn't too far off. So they said, oh no, let's get back home and defend it.
So they abandoned post.
Yeah.
And then, as the legend's concerned, the hunchback sold them out.
Yep.
And they were able to flank the remaining 300. Well, back at that point, especially after the battle with the Immortals, I think it was closer to like 150, 200.
It was starting to dwindle. It was in the 200 range, but when they found out that the Persians were flanking them, it was pretty much a consensus of, yeah, we need to retreat. So the other 1,400 Greeks retreated, but the Spartans said, no, we'll stay, we'll hold them off as long as you can. Because they knew if they couldn't be stopped or at least held at bay, none of the Greek city-states would stand a chance because all their soldiers are out and about there. Because I think...
Well, that, and it was very demoralizing to Xerxes. Now, Xerxes wasn't depicted correctly, hardly at all, but to have 200 some odd men in their last stand so thoroughly beat the asses of the frontline Persian troops, still, it did make Xerxes kind of second guess his tactics, because it was a bloody battle, and I guess Leonidas had no love of Persians because the Persian armies were pretty much conscripted slaves. They kind of went the opposite way of what Alexander the Great would later do. They absorbed you, took all your resources, and you were forced to join the military. There was no real training. They just kind of gave you a sword and said, "Die for Xerxes."
Yeah, the one thing they did still allow, though, the one thing I will defend the Persians on a little bit, is they were still big on letting you keep your religion. There was still some freedoms you were keep, but yeah, if you were conquered, you were pretty much expected, okay, serve Xerxes. But, yeah,
what was Xerxes anyway? Because I know a lot of critics, when the movie first came out, and a lot of, they wanted to make it about the Americans versus the Muslims and stuff like that, but this was pre-everything. Xerxes was what, maybe Zoroastrian?
Yeah, they were Zoroastrian at the time.
Which is actually a monotheistic religion, technically.
Technically, yes, that was one of the first that we know of. But yeah, Xerxes, the one thing they did depict is that he did think of himself as a god king. He thought he was divine in some way or another. But
well, it's hard not to get a big head when you have that many friggin' countries conquered. I mean, and that's sort of throwback to the pharaohs anyway, because the pharaohs thought they were the walking incarnate of the gods too. That even stretched over into the Holy Roman Empire. I mean, every king that ever became a king of Britain or whatnot wanted to trace their lineage back to either Arthur or some sort of Charlemagne or some sort of divine, and some sort of granted by the decree of God.
Yeah, divine right to rule.
Yep, the divine right of kings, whatever the translation is.
But since we're on this topic, there's another little thing. They touched on this in the sequel to the 300 movie, which I never saw just because it was look.
It wasn't terrible, but I think they played very fast and loose with the facts, even more so than the first 300 did.
But so after Leonidas and his 300 finally fell, Xerxes marched his army towards Athens, since they were the big state at the time. Sparta was the second biggest state, but they really didn't.
But Athens was the cultural mecca. Spartan kind of made fun of Athens a lot because they thought that what Athens was doing was kind of silly, effeminate. They weren't really Athenians had a good standing army, but they weren't built for war the way Spartans were. And Athens fell pretty quickly the second time.
Sparta and Athens were pretty much
they're the brothers that hate each other, but no one else can mess with them.
But they were almost dual opposites because you had Sparta, just this military machine of war, because they had to be in that region of Greece. There was nothing. It was a rocky area, constant barbarian attacks, so they had to be strong. Athenians, they were pretty much two completely different states. You had the Spartans, who were the strict military war machine of war. You had the Athenians, still badass Greeks, but instead of the whole infantry being badasses, they were known for their naval military might. And
shock combat, I believe it was called.
Yes. And plus, just culturally, they were fairly different. The Spartans, the term a sparse life or a Spartan life came from that. They did not really have decorative anything. Even military commanders lived in almost hovels. It was pretty much just sparse. That's where that term came from. The Athenians, they were into the culture, the plays, the lavish everything, and into
theater, philosophy, togas.
Now here's the funny thing. Both had slaves, but they both used their slaves for different means. The Athenians used slavery so they could concentrate more on the whole philosophy, education, that stuff, while the Spartans...
Pretty much the slaves are there to do the housework and the meals and stuff like that, while the Athenians could sit around and talk about their philosophy. And you can't talk philosophy if you're vacuuming.
Exactly.
Not so much vacuuming nowadays, but the ancient Athenian equivalent of what vacuuming would have been, or beating the rugs or whatever.
Yes. Back then you just ended up beating your slave until it was clean. But
you name your slave rug.
But the Spartans, they enslaved an entire another city-state solely to grow their wheat, because they said, we're warriors, we're not farmers. Which also, the reason why I got into this, because I just wanted to talk about the Athenian significance in the whole Persian War. So after Leonidas and the 300 fell, Xerxes turned his eyes toward Athens. Now, one of the big leaders there, I believe his name was Pericles. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm bad with names.
No, gosh, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was one of the 18 people that saw 300 Rise of an Empire, and he's actually a main character.
Okay.
But I don't remember what his name was. It sounds like Pericles, but I think it might be something else. Thermocles, something Cles.
Yeah, something Cles. But, okay, so he was actually a old vet.
Yes.
From military. He wasn't a young guy.
He was, if you believe the modern mythology, he was the one that actually fired the arrow that killed Darius, which was Xerxes' father.
Yeah. Because, he was present at the Battle of Marathon and all that fun. But no. So, Xerxes marching towards
Athens.
Sorry. Mine went blank for a second. Okay, now recently in Athens, they had just found a new silver vein. A big gold, or a silver mine. And back then, when the city-state found something like that, the wealth was distributed across the entire city-state. Everyone got a cut of it.
Oh, wow.
But I'm just going to call him Pericles because that's the only name I can think of.
Understood. Feel free to correct us in the comments.
Yes. He realized that their city-state was going to be in some trouble because he knew that the 300 wouldn't be able to last that thing. Actually, this was even before the 300. But he knew his city-state needed to do something. And there was a prophecy from the Oracle of Delphi that said, Athens shall be saved behind the wooden wall. Now, a lot of the people thought, okay, because around the Pantheon, there was a wooden wall. So a lot of people thought, okay, so we all just marshal behind the wooden wall of the Pantheon, we'll all be saved.
Oh, dear.
Pericles was like, that sounds stupid. He says, want to know what actually would help? Would be a wooden wall of triremes, the Greek warships.
Ah.
And so he was able to convince the population to, instead of taking their cut of the silver mines, which today would have been every citizen in America getting $2,000 from the government.
Holy crud.
Yeah. They put all that money into shipbuilding. Now, they ended up garrisoning out pretty sizable naval fleet, but still like maybe a tenth of what the Persians had.
Well, that's being very, very, very liberal. I mean, I understand like a tenth is pretty insignificant, but those Persians had a lot of ships.
Yeah. Now, and this is also pretty much the battle that happened at sea is almost identical to what happened in Thermopylae. The Greeks were able to lure the giant Persian fleet into this channel, and pretty much just like what happened at Thermopylae, little numbers were able to outbeat the bigger force because the Greek ships, they were made for tight turns and ramming, so they were able to ram into the enemy boats, sink them, back quarter or backstroke back out of there, ram the next one, and the entire fleet was lost. But
and the Navy, if I can interrupt you real quick, and the Navy, well, obviously they were all soldiers. A lot of the poor schmucks on Persian ships were poor schmucks on Persian ships who were there to row, steer, whatever. They weren't warriors. So Athenians would jump from boat to boat, kill the crews, and then hop back.
Oh, and another little tidbit, because Xerxes' force was divided. He had the naval force, and he had the land force. The land force made it to Athens, but the city was pretty much evacuated by that time, except for some of the few zealots who stayed behind the wooden wall of the Pantheon. Said, this is what Zeus wanted.
I'm guessing it was burnt down.
Yeah, the entire city was sacked, but Xerxes' supply lanes were cut off because of what happened at sea, so the army had to leave Greece.
Also, too, Xerxes wanted a decisive victory, and that decisive victory would have been, in retrospect, to sack and destroy Sparta, because Sparta was the military city-state. What he wound up doing was he wound up sacking and destroying Athens, the cultural, jewel of all the Grecian city-states, and that inadvertently, through him trying to make an example, kind of caused the rest of the city-states to do what they hadn't done in a long time and actually rally behind a single banner to kick his ass, because it was sort of like, you picked on the one shining aspect of Grecian culture that they all could kind of get behind. It was like, you know what, Athens might be kind of weird, but you know what, they didn't deserve what you did to them.
But yes. It moves on to, since you kind of touched on it, on the how the Athenians and the Greeks in their ship battles could actually hop between ships and stuff. That is actually very reminiscent to Viking or North sea battles, because they had somewhat similar tactics. Instead of rowing and ramming the boat, they would row up, lash on, and pretty much fight and try and take the other boat. There were accounts in Viking sagas and stories of you would have hundreds of boats all lashed together,
Ooh.
and it would become pretty much almost like a land battle.
Oh, wow.
Because, yeah, that'd be kind of interesting sight, seeing 100 or so Viking longboats all tied together and just seeing this big mass of men killing each other on rocking, wet boats.
That would be, that'd also be very, very intimidating. Now, I've always wondered, like, I know they used to have History's Greatest Warrior or something like that on the Spike channel.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
some of it was cool, some of it was kind of, like, forced. I mean, like, I think kind of putting Vlad against Sun Tzu was sort of silly because, of course, Vlad was going to win.
After the first season, I lost all respect for that show because it started getting stupid with Joan of Arc versus William the Conqueror.
Yeah, right?
Somehow Joan of Arc still won. And I'm not trying to sound sexist, but...
Wasn't she like 12?
Something like that. She was like 16 or something. But Joan of Arc was a figurehead. She was not out there fighting. She was just like the mascot saying, hey, this little girl's leading us. Yay, look at that. We're awesome.
Yeah. But they never did a Spartan versus Viking, and I think that would have been...
Because in one of the first...
Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. Correct me if I'm wrong. If it actually happened, I apologize. Send me a correction. But as far as I know, they never had a Spartan warrior or even a Spartan army versus a... well, they had rules of 3. It was like each military leader was given 3 of his men, and yada, yada, yada. But they never had Spartan versus Viking, and I think that would have been an amazing battle. It would have all depended on the terrain, because both pretty much used their terrain to win. So it would have had to be like some sort of neutral, I don't know, like Dragon Ball Z kind of desolate wasteland, and it would depend on if it was naval, half land, what was going on. But Spartans versus Vikings would have been a great thing to see.
Well, I'm just going to touch on this just because Deadliest Warrior was brought up. The Viking one they did have on there, Viking versus Samurai, that was a complete and utter flop. That was so stupid.
Who won that one?
Samurai, because here's this is what they made unfair. Pretty much they made just the generic Viking hopped off the boat, no one of any real significance. Just had chainmail and Viking gear. Versus a samurai in full getup, like
full get up on his home turf.
Well, not even that, but the thing was, we all know what the classic samurai looks like. That's the armor, all the swords, the helmet. Not very few samurai had that because those were expensive. Like, literally, it would take generations for one family member, or, for a family to piece together this. Like, your granddad might start off with a sword, his son might end up getting a breastplate, then the next son or the next offspring would end up getting the helmet. And so pretty much you had what would be the elite of the elite, rich everything samurai versus a run-of-the-mill Viking. If you had it...
Generic Viking Olaf number 4.
Yeah, so if you would have made it more of a run-of-the-mill Rogan samurai of just sword, maybe some basic armor, it would have been a lot better situation. Or had the elite samurai versus the equivalent sort of Viking, a Viking elite Sane or Jarl, someone of importance who could afford the best armor, the best gear, the best all that.
Gotcha. And also, too, the thing that I get the theatrics of it, and as much as I love the television show, yes, I'm going to admit to it, Highlander, a lot of there's been a big myth perpetuated about the katana being like the super blade. Like, you never, oh crap, he's got a katana, let's run away. But the actual use of a katana is so specialized. I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong, it could do a lot of damage, but it's not a hack and slash weapon. There's a technique. You got to use it like a carving knife. And I think it was a video you showed me of a guy who had a katana and made a Viking sword to the specifications Vikings had at the time, and the Viking sword actually did way more damage, cut through more corpses, pig corpses, or carpet rolls.
Well, actually, what it was they had the katana and they had a broadsword. Both did the same cut, and yes, the samurai sword looked impressive, but the broadsword did the same amount of damage, same cut, and it was dull. The test they always show for katanas cutting through like the bamboo with the mat around it.
Those are super sharp, and it's always what the professional knows how to do the cutting motion when they strike and pull towards them or something like that.
Well, the thing is you don't need a super sharp razor edge. I mean, yeah, if you're going up against flesh, yes, but unlike they show in the movies, you do not have the whole parrying with samurai swords, because that would destroy a very expensive sword. It was not meant to parry. If you tried parrying with it, you would end up getting so many chips in it, it would be worthless. And if it was to go up against a Viking broadsword or a Ulfberg, which is the cream of the crop swords that you could get back then, I would say the Viking sword would chop a samurai sword or katana in half.
Or at least damage it beyond any usability.
Yeah. But back to the whole...
Sorry, I didn't mean to get on a sidetrack there, but just wanted to say that because it doesn't get said enough.
Oh, yeah.
Listen to us, Hollywood.
Yeah. I mean, I will admit, katana's great blade. I would never want to have someone hacking at me with it.
No, that goes without saying.
Yeah, but it's one of those things of, if I had a Viking broadsword, especially a Ulfberg, or a katana, I would pick the Ulfberg because more versatile. Two edges, very good stabbing point to it.
And also, if you smack somebody with full armor, you could very easily break bone even if you didn't cut through the armor.
Yeah, and that's another thing is, yes, samurai armor was good, but it's not as great as it showed. If you saw in the show, pretty much the one big weapon I saw, okay, this will just crush the samurai. The Vikings' Dane axe, the big two-handed axe, they took out almost instantly. They had the samurai cut the axe in half in one stroke, and I was like, first of all, no, I don't care how sharp that blade is. If you're using an actual hard wood, they've done tests, you cannot cut it in one half.
Also, knowing Vikings, too, they would just pick up the side with the blade on it still.
Yeah. But, I mean, the entire show was stupid. The expert they had for the Vikings was so moronic for their shield. The shield was the Vikings' specialty weapon. And
historically, weren't they disposable?
Yeah, they were lightweight, center grip shields. Didn't have the strap and all that. In the show, they had the strap, and it was big. It was like 2 inches thick, all riveted with steel and stuff.
So it was completely biased towards the samurai from the get-go.
Yeah, and then when it came to ranged weapons, because there was a ranged weapon category, samurai had their bow, which the samurai started off as archers before they were swordsmen. And so I was like, alright, that's correct. The Vikings, instead of giving them a bow also, because apparently Vikings didn't have the technology for bows, which they did.
They had compasses, but no bows, right?
Yeah. They gave them a spear. And they said, oh, well, the Vikings, they can throw dual spears at once. And I was like, why are you doing this? So, it was so stupid.
So that makes me double think the entire show, because for someone, even who plays a weekend history expert, for that show to be so biased against the Vikings there, how many of the other shows were biased from the beginning?
Well,
but because they weren't like our pet things, we didn't really know much about the... I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm a big Vlad the Impaler guy. I love Vlad the Impaler. But, I think maybe putting him against Sun Tzu, who was more of a philosopher than... I mean, yes, he was a general. Also, the technology difference, the angry wasp hornet nest, or whatever the heck those little fireworks were. Yeah. It was definitely a one-sided battle. That and the fact that, Vlad Tepes was bred in the fires of combat. He was a slave. Came back. I mean, pretty much the Turks taught him how to kill Turks, and then got surprised when he came back and killed Turks so well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But moving on, not to get deviated here, but I would like to see an accurate depiction of some sort of maybe a movie where there's a time warp involved of Spartans versus Vikings.
Yep.
Done well.
So okay, let's have your take on this. Let's just say same amount of, let's just say 1,000 on 1,000 man battle in,
oh my,
let's just say a neutral zone, not anyone's turf, light hills, a few trees, not completely open but not completely closed off. So pretty much neutral ground all the way.
Okay.
What would be your take
on Vikings v Spartans?
Yes.
Therein lies the rub. Vikings were immensely naval. I mean, I know. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I kind of drank the Kool-Aid a little bit when it came to Vikings. I always thought that the Vikings were kind of they were naval through and through. They were kind of meant for quick flash shock boat departures, and then would fuck a bunch of shit up in a short amount of time, and then get back onto the boats. were they actually very, very astute or very good when it came to tactics and land battles?
I'm happy you touched on it. For most of their careers as Viking, which, just to let everyone know, Viking was a profession that literally meant sea raider. Well, everyone uses the term Viking because that's what we all know. But, excuse me. But, yes, the Vikings were known for their hit-and-run tactics of sail up in their boats through the river channels or up to shore, quickly hit a weak target, and run off. But throughout history, there has been time to time where they had to stand toe-to-toe versus a standing army, and they do incredibly well, because they were actually very, very proficient in the skillbull, or shield wall. They had a very...
That would be a cool thing, a Viking shield wall versus a Spartan shield wall.
They literally did the same exact thing.
Phalanx.
Yes, interlocking shields do not break rank unless the enemy is retreating. So they were very good. Many battles in early England versus the Saxons, who were also very similar to Vikings originally. They had a
very good metal band.
Yes.
Sorry.
But yes, Vikings, they did do well in organized battles also.
If I can interject real quick.
Yes.
One of the things I think would be an immediate departure in the difference of reverence for leaders or elders, Vikings versus Spartans, is, I believe, one of the biggest, one of the more famous, because I heard of them, Viking tacticians or badasses or whatever, was Ivar the Boneless. And I don't know exactly if he was born that way or if it was a battle injury, but he was pretty much paralyzed from the waist down, and they would have to carry him around on a shield, but he never missed a battle.
Well, here's the thing. The thing about Ivar the Boneless, one of the greatest leaders in Viking history, or Norse history, along with his brothers, Bjorn Ironside, launched one of the longest Viking raids ever. And yes, if you watch the show The Vikings, yes, they do touch on all those things. They don't get the history 100% right, but I'll allow it. It's a good show. But no, all his brothers were great. Ivar the Boneless, they actually really don't know why he was called Ivar the Boneless. It is kind of generally
implied he couldn't get an erection because he was paralyzed.
There was many things. They said that he might have had a crippling leg disease. They said that he could have been talking about not being able to get up. Or they could have said it could have been just like one of those funny nicknames like Little John. He might have been just a big guy.
Just a big, hulking, massive,
And the thing about being carried on the shield, yeah, you could take that as, oh, he couldn't walk. Well, it could be, if you had a really great leader, a lot of times people would carry their leaders after a great victory.
That's true.
Because he was also known. He did do fighting that was accounted for, so I have a hard time believing that.
He was completely crippled.
Yeah, because even if you were a very good fighter, I don't think you would last very long if you're just being carried up on a shield.
Now, if you were a torso on the ground, like the Black Knight from Monty Python, I don't care how proficient you were, you're not going to last very long.
Mm-hmm. But yes, Ivar the Boneless led one of the biggest military invasions into England and took over most of it. He kind of avenged his father's death, Ragnar Lothbrok, which is also from the show Vikings. I'm not going to go too far into that history because I don't want to spoil the show for you, because I already see what's coming up in the show. But I'll leave it at that. But yes.
Just so you guys know, Wolf researches his own stuff. It just so happens that a lot of this coincides with the show Vikings. We brought up pop culture and movies. This is not where we get our history.
Yes.
But this is where we draw analogies for the population at large, so we can actually point you guys in the right direction of some of the stuff that they got right, some of the stuff they got wrong.
Yes. Like, here's a little tidbit for you followers of the show. In last season, if you remember, the siege of Paris, where Ragnar faked his death. Oh, spoiler alert, if anyone doesn't watch the show. But, whatever.
Oh no!
Shut up. But,
Hansel dies.
Okay. In the show, Ragnar fakes his own death. He's put into a coffin, and his son says, "We're going to be leaving Paris. Our leader's dead." But his last request was that he wanted to be given a Christian burial in the church. And for some reason, the French king said, okay, sure, just leave us alone. Ragnar, in his casket with his pallbearers, went in. They're at the church. Ragnar springs out, takes the princess hostage, kills everyone. They siege and sack the city of Paris. That was completely false, but it was based on something his sons did.
But they did the same thing, but they sacked the wrong city, but they still sacked it.
Bjorn Ironside and his other brother, which his name escapes me, who launched the longest running Viking raid in history, sailed all the way up to Constantinople, which is modern day Istanbul.
Yep.
Did the same thing. His brother, Bjorn's brother, I forget his name, not Ivar, but faked his death, snuck in a casket, and they raided and sacked
the old Trojan coffin trick.
Yes. So the show is good, but they're trying to compress about 200 years of Viking history into one show, which I'll allow it just because it's one of the better depictions of Viking life. Yes, it's not perfect.
Well, I just like the fact that for the first time in like modern media, they actually have Vikings with accurate garb on, because the whole Vikings with the horns on the helmet came from Wagner's operas.
Well, actually, that was one thing I was about to touch on. One thing about the show, they get a lot of stuff right. But sorry to correct you on this, the garb is wrong. Yeah, they're not wearing horned helmets, which if they did, it would be a laughing stock. But I saw in an interview, and I agree with this. Pretty much, they dress them up like it's pretty much Sons of Anarchy, Viking Age. Pretty much, it's all just leather jerkins, leather jackets. Looks cool, but in real life, they were wearing chainmail and some armor. You see all the other people they're fighting in armor. The Vikings would have had armor, but I'll allow it because at least they get the mindset right. And the show, they don't try and smear it where trying to make them look like the goody two-shoes. Like when Ragnar and his Vikings land in England for the first time, which Ragnar was not the one who raided Lindisfarne. But,
Now, really quick, Wolf, let's wind this down because this wasn't supposed to become a Viking series review. Don't get me wrong, it's amusing as all hell.
Okay.
But I don't want to turn anybody off who's either seen the show or not seen the show yet.
You're right. Let's get back to our initial thing of who would win, Vikings or Spartans, in neutral zone.
Honestly, man, that would be a coin flip. Especially, I'd say that the Spartans had discipline, but so do the friggin' Vikings. I think it would really, honestly, probably matter who drew first blood. It would also depend on because the Vikings had bows, the Spartans had bows.
Actually,
the Spartans did they just have would they carry bows in the battle or spears?
They had javelins and spears. Spartans actually had a very disdain for bows and arrows. They thought that was dishonorable.
Oh,
The city state of Sparta didn't even have a wall. Their men were their wall.
Gotcha. It would honestly matter. Like it would just depend on. Okay, the one thing I would have to say maybe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
Spartan leadership. Let's say Leonidas or like one of the other guys was there, in the battle, and he was taken out. The Spartans would just kind of pick up where they left off and continue. With the Vikings, if one of their main guys were to get an axe in the head and die, would that fuck with morale, or would it?
It kind of depends, but from what I've studied, in most battles where the military leader died in those battles, yeah, normally that force would end up retreating back for multiple reasons. One, when it came to Vikings, they were about getting paid.
True, and if the leader's dead, that's kind of a paycheck gone.
Yeah, and plus, when you're looking up to your military leader like that, yeah, there might be some who would say, no, let's just keep fighting, we have to do honor towards him. Others might say, oh crap, there goes our leader, we don't know what the hell to do.
So I guess being of Scandinavian descent myself, I would love for the Vikings to win, but I might, on neutral ground, have to lean towards the Spartans.
This is my take on it. If it was on neutral terrain like that, or neutral terrain, if there was no real huge strategic like flanking stuff. If it was just one-on-one shield wall clash against shield wall, I could see it going either way, but I think it would really come down to the initial impact of it.
Like I said, who bled first?
If the Spartan shield wall were able to hold up to the pure match and shock the Vikings, I think the Spartans would be able to hold off there and just keep long. But if the Vikings were able to break through either with berserkers or just a really massive shield charge and broke through the front lines of the Spartans, I could see it going bad for the Spartans. Mostly because, yes, Spartans, badass warriors, but they were trained a lot in group team battles, pretty much.
Gotcha. Whereas Vikings, one Viking could probably take on a single Spartan, no problem. A single Spartan would sort of feel naked without his unit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to discredit the Spartans. One-on-one, they did good too, but the Vikings, they had a lot bigger mindset of personal honor, personal gain, and personal greatness. So they were very proficient in one-on-one battles. And like I said, if you sent in a team of berserkers hopped up on mushrooms, big burly naked guys with huge axes, if they were able to break through the Spartans' front lines, yeah, they'd probably be impaled pretty quickly after that. But I think if the line was broken, the Spartans would be cut down eventually. I think it would still be a drawn-out battle. But if the Spartans were able to hold their front line...
And I can actually see the survivors, post-clash, on both sides, getting drunk together. Because the Spartans are all about the beautiful death. And they gave respect where respect was due. Like I said, they had no love of Xerxes' bullshit because... But, I mean, against warrior and warrior, I mean, obviously there'd be some, irritation on whole, well, you killed my friends, but... I don't know. I think they would give each other credit where credit was due, post-clash.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not trying to discredit you, but in all actuality, what I think, just because both cultures
were so different that they probably wouldn't even look at each other as humans.
Well, kind of, because Spartans, a lot like the Romans and stuff, they were actually, lack of a better term, bigots and racists. If you weren't Greek, you were a barbarian.
Oh, and that barbarian, they wouldn't have given the time of day to Vikings.
And the Vikings, they were kind of the same thing, especially with the religious aspect of, why are you guys worshiping these puny gods? Why aren't you worshiping Thor or Odin?
Yeah, why are you worshiping these friggin' these shape-shifting rapist gods?
Essentially, yes, and plus the Vikings were also kind of big on...
well, the Vikings believe their gods are going to die alongside them one day.
Yeah. And also the Vikings did believe a lot in preserving the race. They didn't particularly like the idea of intermingling with other cultures because for the time, the Vikings, the Scandinavians were... I'm not trying to sound racist or a Aryan supporter, but if you have an entire race of big, burly, blonde-haired or red-haired people, they tended to want to keep them. They didn't want to interbreed.
Well, that's just eugenics, and that's been a common practice of virtually every warrior culture since the dawn of time. It's nothing racist about it. Nowadays, yes, but back then that was survival, just like the Spartans. The whole throw the baby off the cliff. If the baby was sick, if the kid had asthma, whatever, that's straight up eugenics. Now, if you're a player of the video game Destiny, like my buddy Ryan is, my buddy Tim Day, better gear makes you a better person. Not something I totally agree with when it comes to MMORPGs or RPGs in general, but it's kind of true to real life. So also, the meat and potatoes of this argument, Spartans versus Vikings, would really depend on gear versus gear. Viking gear, Viking weaponry, Viking armor, versus Spartan armor, weaponry, and the such. So let's have our local expert here, Wolf, give us a breakdown of what we would expect in a basic infantry battle between Vikings and Spartans.
Okay. Well, we'll start out with the Spartans, because another thing I want to correct about the 300 movie, I'm not trying to get back onto that.
No, they were naked, and that was absurd.
Yeah. The only thing they got right was the red cloaks. Spartans wore red cloaks so you couldn't see them bleed.
Just like Deadpool.
Yeah.
Well, see, the thing that I kind of thought was somewhat disturbing, and not disturbing as I'm uncomfortable with male nudity, but maybe unnecessary. But I actually read the graphic novel 300,
Yeah.
and Frank Miller, the guy who brought us, Dark Knight Returns, all the Spartans were naked.
Yeah.
There was flopping wieners all over that graphic novel. The fact they actually bothered with underpants in that movie was a service.
Yeah. But, okay, back onto the initial thing. The Spartans, they were just taking the classical Spartan. It would have, top-of-the-line Spartans would have had bronze breastplate. Now, a lot of people discredit bronze being an inferior metal to iron or steel, which it is. But the Spartans, being manly and all, just wore very thick bronze. And it could take some good abuse. And same thing with their helmets. So you would have expected them to wear a front and back bronze breastplate and backplate, the bronze Corinthian helmet, which pretty much covered the entire face, just leaving enough room for the eye slots and a little bit of the breathing room. Bronze shin guards and bracers, and their iconic large, heavy bronze shield, which was a weapon in and of itself. For their arms, they would have the, correct me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, I think it's called the Dory, the Spartan spear, which I think was 5.5 or 6 feet long.
It wasn't a tiny spear.
Yeah. And it had a spike on the backside too, just for the fact. Throwing weapons, they would have javelins or slings. Slings were pretty popular still back then. And they had their Spartan sword, which in the show, or in the movies 300, they did not carry that. I don't know who came up with that idea of a sword for it.
Pretty much the Spartan sword didn't look very different from a typical Grecian. Gosh, I totally forget the kopis. It was pretty much a meat machete, and it was very stylized and pretty looking in 300.
Well, in actuality, the Spartans didn't even carry the kopis. Though I love the kopis, but 300 carried. I can hardly even consider it a sword. It's more just a meaty dagger. It was, I think, 9 inches long or something like that.
Damn.
It was meant for face-to-face, I'm going to gut you right now. Because your primary weapon was your spear. You only took out the sword if your spear broke or you lost it. And if that was the case, that's when you just hurl yourself at the guy in front of you and just start hacking and slashing and stabbing. And that was the Spartans' primary gear. The Vikings, typical Vikings, would have had the cotton undercoat with mail on top. Something that I wish the show Vikings would have touched on, but they didn't. They would have had the, I forget the name of their helmet, but it was similar to the Greeks' helmet. Enclosed, it had the upper half of their cheekbones, eyes covered, but the lower mouth was normally exposed. You might have some chainmail over that too, but that's up to the actual Viking. And that was actually, to be fair, that's only some Vikings. Not all Vikings would have had that. But let's just say it was a standing army of Vikings who could afford at least the basic gear. So they would have had helmets, chainmail.
Did Vikings purchase their gear?
Yes.
Or did they, or was it pilfered through raids? Or kind of column A, column B?
Yeah. Same thing was, yeah. Unlike the Spartans, who, they were furnished their gear. The other Greek city-states, you had to buy your own gear. But no, Spartans, you had your standard issue. I'm not sure if you still had to pay for your standard issue, but I would think it would be given to you. But correct me if I'm wrong.
Or at least passed down.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. But, so the Vikings would have had chainmail. Not so much in the way of leg gear. They might have had some chainmail on their legs, but they would have at least had heavy-duty leather or wool. Something to give a little bit of protection. Not so much in lower leg protection.
Because if they're so proficient in naval combat, they also would probably want to be able to swim should the worst happen.
True.
You throw a Spartan in a tank of water, and they'll probably just float like a stone.
So you would have chainmail, helmet, and you would have had the classic center grip shield, which was a lightweight shield was just a center grip that you could pivot. Very lightweight, and it was actually meant to almost be a throwaway shield because it was meant to take a sword hit, have the sword go a quarter ways or halfway through, and then it's like, aha, now I got your sword caught in my shield. Stab, stab, stab.
Gotcha. Now, I heard of duels where certain Vikings. I mean, they fought each other too on occasion.
Yes, a lot.
Duels where the great warriors facing each other down while their men kind of watched, smacking into each other, destroying each other's shields, actually having a halt, going to the corpses and picking up new shields.
Yes. And, so yes, lightweight shield. You would have had spears. Spear infantry was very popular with some. I would just say it's the equivalent to the Spartan dory. About the same length, same purpose behind it. Spear, stab the guy in front of you.
Make a giant porcupine wall.
They would have had their Viking war axe, just single-handed, bearded axe, very good shield and axe combo. And then they also would have had the Viking sax, which short dagger, actually probably about the same size as the Spartan short sword.
I saw a movie about the Viking sax once. Nothing.
Okay. And then the more elite Vikings who could actually afford it would have Viking broadswords. I'm going to be fair, and I'm not going to say they're all Ulfbert swords. If you know what an Ulfbert sword is, they're pretty much the Holy Grail swords. Pretty much almost modern day tool spring steel back in the Viking days, which there's still a lot of mystery behind, but I'm just going to say standard iron swords.
Okay.
They normally range between 30 to 32 inches, so a lot longer reach than the Spartan sword. But thinking about it, would still come down to, I think, if the Spartan shield wall would hold. The more I'm thinking about, I think the Spartans would win just because of the shield differences. Because if big heavy bronze shield versus lightweight shield, which was good, but I think the Spartan spears would pretty much tear up the shields.
True, because the spears, like I said, if the shields were designed to catch swords, but like a spear might be able to go right through it.
Possibly. Though you could argue that the spears could get caught in them too. So that I'll go either way on that. It just depends on how skilled the person is. Because if you're skilled, you're able to retrieve your spear out of it. Then it comes down to armor. Vikings had chainmail. Spartans had... I'll actually give the Spartans had better armor just because more coverage. They had the helmet, the greave, the bracers, and the heavy-duty chest plate. Yes, made out of bronze, but it was thick enough that it could take a sword stroke from a broadsword and could take a good stab. The Viking chainmail, it does also come down to the quality of that. If it's riveted chainmail, Spartans might have a little bit of a hard time, but at the same time, they were very proficient spearmen. And I can see it.
Even if they didn't penetrate the chainmail, they're breaking bones.
Not so much with spears, but I could see the Spartans' spears penetrating chainmail if they were good enough, and even if it doesn't penetrate the chainmail, they still have enough area on the Viking's body to stab at. So I will give it to the Spartans purely on the fact of the initial shield wall. I could see the Vikings smashing into it and just end up smashing their shields on Spartan shield wall. Now, I could be wrong. I'm not going to say I'm an expert in any of this. I just like to think I know a thing or two. And it also comes down to, like, if you had Viking berserkers. If you had a big berserker who didn't feel pain, you have a big 250-pound naked man rushing at you. Yeah, if he's able to just thunder through the shield wall, end up being killed in the process, but still, you're opening up a hole in it. So it still could go either way, but I will give the advantage to the Spartans. Now, if you're going to do actual military maneuvers, I will give it to the Vikings, because the Vikings were more hit and run. They could maneuver a lot better than the Spartans could.
Well, they were picking with, they were picking on the precursors or whatever, the Holy Roman Empire. They were sacking cities with large standing armies. I mean, the Vikings gave like the biggest kid on the block a couple of black eyes.
Yeah.
Throughout history. Excellent. Well, that was involved, and I hope the listeners learned something here. So, I brought him up a couple of times, and I'm going to sound like a horrible person for saying this, but in addition to Teddy Roosevelt, one of my big historical man crushes of all time has got to be Vlad Tepes. He's kind of unfairly depicted as a villain. I mean, he's the villain. He's Dracula, for God's sake. But there's a reason the citizenry revere him. He's almost like Doctor Doom. If you lived in Latveria, in the Marvel Universe, if you lived in Latveria, you're very well taken care of. And all Doctor Doom really does, other than like kind of flaunt the diplomatic immunity thing when he goes to New York and tries to blow stuff up, is all he wants to do is defend his home country from Reed Richards or the Avengers. Tepes was sort of like that. He was part of, I forget what the actual the term was, but him and his brother were essentially given away to the Turkish head of state as a was it ransom, like king ransom, something like that.
Yeah, very much.
Pretty much like, we won't attack you if you give us our children, or give us your children. And he was for against whatever logic, because I guess the Turks didn't think that this would ever bite them in the ass, but he was trained in the art of Turk killing by the Turks, and then later on went back and reclaimed his birthright and proceeded to systematically screw up and mess up the Turks. Well, actually, you know what? I've already kept you here for almost an hour and a half. I hope the viewers or the listeners learned something. We could actually probably roll over into Vlad Tepes and the fights against the Turks and the reign of Dracula in our next segment, because one quick anecdote from history I would like to share before we depart is in Transylvania, Romania, in the center of town was a fountain from which any traveler could drink, any citizen could drink. On that fountain was a solid gold goblet, easily worth a king's ransom. I mean, this thing was good. And through all of Vlad's reign in Transylvania, not a single soul stole that goblet, because they felt A, it belonged to the city, and B, Vlad is going to find who stole it and do horrible things to the person who stole it, so why take a chance?
Well, yeah, this is the same guy that foreign diplomats came to his palace.
Refused to take their turbans off.
Yeah, they're half their turban.
Whatever they were.
So Vlad said, okay, I'm going to nail them to your head. So, the way I feel about Vlad, he just did what he had to do because he was in a tiny little nation surrounded by big, big nations. He did what he had to do.
If you want to draw a parallel here, and I don't want to get political, but Transylvania was kind of the medieval version of Israel today. A small country that had to do what it had to do to survive, surrounded by large Islamic powerhouses who pretty much just kind of wanted to convert and kill. I'm not saying that all Muslims are like that, but I'm saying the analogy, I believe, reigns true.
True.
So, anyways, thank you all for being my guest on this segment.
Anytime.
This is Doc Hardtree with Wolf. This is Your History. Have a good one.